Let's talk about a different way to live that might save your bank account and your sanity at the same time. We're diving into multi-generational housing. Let's get into it. Hey guys, how you doing? Werenka here. I'm the state of Michigan broker for Simply Home. We're one of the fastest growing real estate companies in the United States, and I've got an all-star team. So whether you're looking to buy, sell, invest, rent, whatever you need, we've got you covered. We even do property management now. So it's no secret that in the real estate market, affordability is a challenge right now nationally. We're a little bit insulated from that here in the Midwest and Detroit specifically, but still, I think everybody would like to see the price of houses, maybe come down on the buy side, have some more affordable options for people who are looking to take that step, buy that first home, buy that next home. You name it, downsize, whatever the case may be, everybody's kind of looking for a way to make that as affordable as possible. And one of the ways that people are doing that, and this is becoming more and more prevalent throughout the country and in our market here in Metro Detroit, is families moving back in together, but not necessarily in the way you think. This isn't like crashing on a couch or hanging out in mom's basement or anything like that. This is a real estate move that makes sense for the whole family, whether that's grandparents moving in to help watch grandchildren, adult kids, staying at home longer to save money, or simply like siblings or even friends just like buying a place together to accomplish that same goal. Multi-generational housing is really starting to have a resurgence. Here's the realistic part of it though. Here's the thing. If you don't pick the right type of housing, you're going to be at each other's throats within 6 months. So let's talk about the various ways to accomplish this while maintaining your sanity, your family relationships, and your pocketbook. There's so many different options. There's everything from ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units that are, maybe a tiny home on the lot of an established single family home, to homes that have dual primary suites where there's two primary suites on opposite sides of the house, to fully finished basements and doing it the right way. We'll cover all those. So let's just jump right in. And we'll start with the most affordable option, which is the internal suite, which essentially is the most budget-friendly way of doing this. And that's taking the existing footprint of the house and then either finishing a basement or maybe finishing an attic and creating a separate living space in that original home. And again, I want to be very, very clear on this. This is a far cry from just crashing in mom's basement. We're talking about taking a portion of that home that wasn't currently utilized and turning that into a self-contained living area. And here's the thing, you're going to want a few things out of this. This needs to make sense long-term. It needs to make sense for resale value. And once you do this work, you want to make sure it adds value to your home currently. In order to accomplish all those goals, you're going to need three things. It's going to need, number one, a private entrance, number two, a kitchenette, and number three, its own independent climate control. And living where we are here in Michigan, there's so many like walk-up basements or daylight basements in homes. So it makes it really convenient. And those are probably the easiest types of living spaces to convert. But here's the thing, no matter what you do with this internal suite, it's super important to add egress. That is going to be non-negotiable. That's going to have to happen. And what I mean by that is like an actual egress window is a well that's cut into the foundation of your home if you don't already have one. And if it's not a true walkout basement. So you're literally cutting into the foundation. You are putting typically a window and usually like steps. And basically what it means is if the house catches on fire, whoever's in the basement has a way to escape the home and not die. So again, very important feature to have. And it's such a safety issue. Like I've had homes before that had beautifully finished basements with bedrooms and everything that we've already talked about. But when it comes time to list that house, you cannot call that a basement unless there is an egress window or a means to egress that basement. That doesn't count as finished living space unless you have that. Another consideration for that is the electrical panel itself. If you're adding, a second stove, a microwave, maybe a space heater, some kind of heating system, maybe an electric baseboard into that basement, you probably don't want to be running on old 100 amp service at that point. You're going to be tripping breakers every time somebody uses the toaster if that panel gets overloaded. So upgrading to 200 amp service is probably worthwhile if you're going to be making this type of a transition in your home, you're going to be consulting with all kinds of tradespeople. Make sure you mix an electrician into that, get their opinion on it, because, who knows, maybe your house may be able to absorb that. But a lot of these older homes, especially the Woodward Corridor area, St. Clair Shores, another area that I do business, these older homes from like the 50s, 60s, and in Ferndale's case, like the 20s and 30s, you're probably looking at an electrical upgrade to really make this work for you. And then the last thing that makes a lot of sense in this type of a project on a home is rock wool insulation. Another solution would be sound dampening channels in the ceiling of the basement. The goal that we're looking for here is, proximity without friction. You want to be able to share that Sunday dinner without hearing everything that's going on between the levels of the home. Second option, I really like this one. This is really becoming more and more prevalent, and I like it because of the different variety and options you have available, and that's ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So let's talk about those for a minute. So let's say your existing home just isn't big enough to make any kind of accommodations and have multi-generational living within the footprint of the house. Maybe your home's on a slab or a crawl space, so you don't have a basement to finish. Maybe the attic is just too low, whatever the case may be. Now we're talking about the backyard revolution and ADUs. And I know these are a lot more prevalent on the West Coast. I know California changed their zoning laws after they had all those fires and made it possible to build accessory units just to have places for people to live. And, the nicknames for these, they're granny flats or backyard cottages. But this is the holy grail of multi-generational living because it solves a lot of problems. First and foremost being actual true independence. It's just nicer. A lot of people just like it more to have their own four walls and their own front porch. And we're seeing more of these pop up around here. But the truth of the matter is they aren't cheap and they aren't easy. And the most important first step when you're even thinking about doing this before you go out and buy that shipping container and plop it in your backyard and get to work is consult with your local building department. That is the key thing. 100% first and foremost. If it's a building that's not on a permanent foundation with water and sewer lines in, it's basically just an expensive garden shed at that point. So we're going to need to make sure that you're taking the actual steps needed to make that a livable space that the city is going to sign off on. And certain cities might not even allow it. So again, first step, before you do anything else, call the building department, make sure you can even do something like that. And then it's just essentially at this point, like building a new house on your lot because you have to abide by all the zoning regulations, like setback requirements. In Ferndale, any permanent structure needs to be a certain number of feet away from the lot line. You're only allowed, I think in Ferndale, you can use 36% of the square footage of the lot for ground floor square footage for structures. So you're going to need to make sure that you're that you're abiding by all those rules as well. And then things like, plumbing has to be below the frost line, which in our neck of the woods is 42 inches. Everything has to go below that in order to make sure the pipes don't freeze in January like we are in right now. A day like today when it's 8 degrees, your pipes would freeze and burst if they weren't at least that far underground. So we just, all that stuff adds up. That all costs money. So this may not be the most budget friendly option, but we're talking all the options. If this is the right option for you, then it's absolutely a cool way to go. So long story short, by the time you're all said and done, getting this thing ready and built and approved and permitted and utilities and the whole 9 yards, it's not going to be cheap. You could spend, anywhere from like $80,000 to $150,000 putting an accessory dwelling on your lot. But then let's check the math. If the other option is purchasing a second home for, $350,000, you're already ahead of the game. So it's definitely an option that's out there for you. Another idea that I've been seeing pop up more and more, a lot of these like newer construction condos, and now we're seeing it a lot in newer construction, single family homes as well, is properties that have a dual primary suite on their floor plan. And, this isn't going to work for everybody. It's a really nice setup. And, usually when I'm walking through those types of properties with clients, they really like the idea of having two primary suites on opposite sides of the home. They're usually like equally sized. So it's not like one person gets the better one. They're generally speaking going to be both really nice suites. Now, in these type of instances, you're sharing a kitchen, you're sharing bathrooms, except for like the primary baths. But that being said, it's definitely an option. It has to be right for you, obviously, but in a lot of circumstances, It's a really nice setup, and it's a good way of, not necessarily having to go through the expense or having to hunt around and find a home that has a true mother-in-law suite. And what I mean by that, this is close enough to a dual primary suite property. A mother-in-law suite is, you have your existing home, and then it's kind of like what we talked about on the initial finishing a basement or finishing an attic. But a lot of times a mother-in-law suite is more, it's built onto the house right when it was first built. And that's usually, it's like a small apartment. Again, it has a kitchenette and a bathroom, but it's attached to the main dwelling. And we see those quite a bit. They're not like super prevalent. Not everybody needs one or anything like that. But that being said, they're not that hard to find if you go out looking for them. But that's an option. I like this option too. And typically speaking, the homes that have dual primary suites are going to be a little more modern. They're going to be in a lot of times, a more upscale areas just from where they're built. And yeah, it's a great option for people that need that specific option. And then we're gonna finish up with, the most obvious one is just buying a multifamily home. Well, there's plenty of those out there. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of that, and then when I think of this setup in general, is the city of Hamtramck. I mean, if you're familiar with Hamtramck, I would say 90% of the homes in that city are the same style to where they can be used as multifamily or single family. Generally speaking, we're talking a two-story property. They're usually like mirror images. The second floor looks exactly like the first floor. And then there's a stairwell that goes up the back of the house, but it's not outside. It's built, you walk in the back door and then there's a stairwell that goes up to the second floor. So you can feasibly use those as a big single family home, or you can just like, they have their own private entrance and their private utilities and separate everything. So you certainly can use those as multifamily properties as well. But it's a really nice setup. And you're not going to get that out of every type of multifamily, but I find that like the upper lower two families probably are a little more conducive than the side by side ones, because a lot of times those are just basically your two ranches that are stuck together. And it's, not as easy to pass through between the two units. And if we get in the Wayback Machine and go back to when these houses were built in Hamtramck, which a lot of these are, from the 1900 to about 1925 is when most of those were built. And they were built because there were multiple generations living in properties. So you could have like the parents live downstairs and the kids live upstairs. And then the parents can watch the grandkids, like exactly what we're talking about now. So those were like purpose built for that reason. And nowadays they've just been modified and people use them. However, it's not unusual to see that type of house listed as a single family and a multifamily when you look at it on the MLS. And then one last point on multifamily properties is probably better than any of the other type of options we've been looking at. These work best when you don't need a multi-generational living area anymore. Those work best for rentals for sure, for sure. Like it could be a little awkward, maybe renting out your basement to somebody, even if they have a private entrance and their own thing. Like that's not a family member. You might just put an ad on, Zillow and find somebody to rent your house. You don't really know them. That could be awkward. Same with somebody living in your backyard. Like you never, it's just kind of strange. But with a multifamily, that's kind of what you expect. Those are set up a little bit more conducively, if that's a real word, to turn those into investment properties. And then down the road, maybe you just rent out both units, keep it. And if you have a triplex, or quad, same deal. And at one point, just real quick, apropos of a little bit about this video, a multifamily up to 4 units is considered a residential property. So you can get a 30-year conventional mortgage on that type of property. When it becomes 5 units or more, now it's considered a commercial property and the financing on that gets totally different. So just keep in mind, like 1 to 4 unit is going to be considered residential. And that would be the same as just getting a mortgage on a single family home. So if this all sounds great and you're ready to take the next step, let's talk about that real quick, because there are 7 questions you need to get the answers to before you do anything, before you go down to the building department, pick up the phone, spend a dime on anything. So let's get into those. Make sure you know the answers to these. This is going to help you out a lot when you get started. And number 1, you need to know what your specific zoning is on your home. Most residential properties are zoned R1, that's just single family residential, or there are some residential properties that are zoned R2, and that's going to make a big difference when it comes to what you can do with your property. So I guess I lied. The first thing you should do is call the zoning department or the planning department in your city. They'll be able to look up your specific address and tell you exactly how it's zoned. Or you can just call me if you're in Michigan and I can look it up on public records. Question number 2, is owner occupancy going to be required? Some cities require you to live in one of the units. And if that's not going to be the case, then this whole thing is probably not going to work for you. Question number 3 is going to be setback and height restrictions. So again, that's what we kind of talked about a little bit. Like the dwelling is going to have to be a certain number of feet off the actual lot line. There are some height requirements in some cities. You can't build a 100-foot high building in the middle of a residential neighborhood, generally speaking. So we need to make sure that we're complying with all the building codes before we even start really getting too far into it, because you might decide you want to do one thing, and then based on the building codes and what you're able to do, you end up doing something completely different. If you're in an area where you can share the utilities from the main house, just like split it off and run it to the other unit, that's going to save a ton of money, because it is expensive to tap into sewer and water lines and have them run new electrical, new gas to a new dwelling. Like you could be talking up to like $20,000 in savings. So that's something that we really want to find out right off the bat. Number 5, what's the maximum lot coverage percentage that's allowed in your municipality? That's kind of what we talked about, where most of the cities around here are anywhere from 33 to 36% of the lot can be covered with that's the ground floor square footage. So you could obviously build, higher, and that it still only counts as that, percentage that of the ground floor that's taken up out of that square footage of the lot. But it's really important to find out what the restrictions are in your city, because again, you might have an idea that you want to do one thing and then the city won't allow it, so you end up having to do something different. Number 6, are there any design compatibility rules? Because it is in some areas that accessory unit has to kind of look like the main house. That might not even be possible depending on what the main house looks like. And like, who knows, some ornate Tudor style brick, beautiful ornate house from 100 years ago, you're probably gonna go broke trying to make something look like that nowadays with modern construction prices and everything. Yeah, it's definitely important to know that that what your design is going to be feasible in the city that you're considering to build it in. And then number 7, back to egress, because it's super important. But what are the requirements in the municipality that you're planning on building in, as far as basement conversions go? Because I know here in Ferndale, I've had a property before that had an egress window in the actual bedroom of a finished basement, and the city wouldn't let me call it a bedroom. So, it's going to be, every city is a little different, and it's definitely worth picking up the phone to find out before you spend all that money and do all that work. Again, the resale is definitely one of the considerations you should be thinking about when you even start doing this. And if it's going to impact your resale value, then maybe it's not worth even starting the project. So definitely think about that before you get too far into the weeds. All right, let's jump into some numbers here real quick, so you can kind of see what the benefit of like the one mortgage power play is in this scenario. Let's say mom and dad are paying $2,400 a month for a condo in Troy, and you're paying $2,200 a month for a bungalow in Royal. So obviously, when you add those together, $4,600 a month, that's leaving the family. If you decide to pool your resources and maybe purchase a home with an ADU, maybe your mortgage is going to be $3,200 a month. So you just found $1,400 every single month that stays within your family. Over the course of 10 years, that's $168,000 that stays in your family's bank account. And that's before you factor in the year-over-year appreciation of that property itself. That goes into building a single higher value asset that has more, just more resale value, more value in general. Even if somebody wanted to buy it and use it as a rental, now they have 2 rentals instead of 1. So that there's more value in that home than there would be as just 2 single family properties. Legal suites, that everything's done properly and right. They typically sell faster and they sell at a premium, because there are specific buyers that are only looking for that type of property and they're willing to pay more for it. I kind of compare it to the homes with like a swimming pool, because there aren't as many pool homes here in Metro Detroit that you'd think there are. And a lot of times when people are looking for a home with a pool, that is their number one criteria. So location and, all these other things are secondary to the just finding a house with a nice pool. This is the same deal. If we absolutely need to have a multi-generational situation and, only 10 to 15% of the homes on the market in an area will meet those criteria, your home just got worth more money. Congratulations. And then one other thing to keep in mind, no matter what type of multi-generational solution works for you, I know it's family. This is a little touchy, but don't do this on a handshake. You should put a family operating agreement together in writing. Everybody signs it, get everybody on the same page. Who's responsible for taxes? If the roof leaks, who pays for it? You have to kind of treat it like a business agreement, even though it's family. I don't want to cause anybody generational trauma by having this all fall apart and be terrible for them. So have those conversations up front. Again, put it in writing. Make sure everybody knows what their responsibilities are, and this, you're nipping a whole lot of problems in the bud that could happen down the road. And if you're looking for properties that kind of fit this criteria in the Metro Detroit area and you don't know where to start, you can give me a call anytime. As always, my direct line, call or text, is 586-491-5622. Email Derek Werenka at Simply Home. I'm on all the socials. You can DM me. I'll respond really quick. And while we're at it, since you're watching this still, if you don't mind just hitting subscribe, hitting the like button, drop a comment if you want. I'd love to know, if you're considering this type of property or if it's just something that kind of caught your attention. Just kind of want to know where people are at on this, because, it's something that is becoming more and more prevalent. I've had a lot of buyers recently talk to me about the potential for doing multi-generational housing, which is one of the reasons why I made this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. If there's anything else I can do for you, as always, just reach out anytime. Again, Derek from Simply Home. Let's get you home.